row. Yeah, but he committed a penalty. Then before he could even get into the penalty box, he committed another one before the Golden Knights could even touch it. So instead of being 5-on-3, it was 2 5-on-4s in a row. They score on both of those, and then from there it was just like the floodgates had opened.
Right. The Golden Knights are the talk of the town, especially in the sports world, with their 8-3 start to their inaugural season. Despite a recent 2-game losing streak, it's been super exciting, and we just had to get in on the action here in the Las Vegas Sun newsroom. I'm with the expert, the insider, Jesse Granger. I'm Case Keefer for our first ever Golden Knights chat. We've solicited your questions. We want to take more. Get on the Las Vegas Sun Facebook. You're already there watching this, so shoot us some questions to talk about. Let's just start there, Jesse. How exciting this has been. You've been around the team, from the very beginning, almost, at all the practices, the games. What stood out to you most about this first little stretch with the expansion franchise?
Well, George McPhee and Gerard Gallant, they stressed getting good people in the organization. And obviously, you want talented hockey players, or you're not going to win on the ice. But they stressed getting good guys and just being around these guys in the locker room. Everyone's really gets along well, and I think that's part of the reason that they've started off so well, is these guys have just gotten into this and they've become a team before people thought they would, even before we thought they would.
For sure, I think that's definitely manifested itself. You can see it seems like they have, the kind of chemistry, like they've been playing together for years. Even though they're all new, it seems like they've all had something to prove, played really hard. But I think, when you go back to that 2-game losing streak, it's where we are right now. I think it's no mystery, the biggest reason why people are talking about the goalie injuries, down to the 4th goalie already, just terrible luck. Max Lagacé started last night, now has 2 losses on the year, and I think that's a good place where people are asking a lot of questions. The number one question I think around this team right now is, when are we going to see Marc-Andre Fleury, who's out nursing that concussion? When's he going to be back on the ice? Yeah,
that's the million-dollar question with this team right now, and with concussions, it's so difficult to tell. If it's a groin injury or an ACL or something, most of the time the doctor can tell you it's going to be this long to recover. With a concussion, it's just they're going to test him every day. He's going to go through the concussion protocol, and eventually he will be fine. What we do know is Gerard Gallant has told us once he does hit the ice, it's going to take him about 4 to 5 days to get ready to play. We asked him for timeline. They won't give us one. The only thing we do have is when we asked him, is it going to be months, days, weeks, what is it going to be? He laughed and said it should be days, and he said not this week, but maybe the week after that. It's just all up in the air right now, but I would say I don't expect him to miss like an extended portion of the season.
Yeah, important to note, Fleury is on the road trip right now. Of course, 2 games down. They lost the first 2. They're going to be back in action Thursday night at Boston for their 3rd game in 4 nights, I guess. We're doing firsts all the time with this franchise team, but yet another one. I believe it's a 6-game trip, so some more games after that. I think if you're a Golden Knights fan, you got to hope Fleury gets back there. I think that was probably our most popular question across our social media platforms, so we couldn't really give one person credit, but we'll try to give you a shout-out here if you ask a question and say where it came from. Sticking with the goalies, this is one from Lay Rinkrat. He wants an update not on Marc-Andre Fleury, but Oscar Dansk, a guy that started the season in the AHL, kind of their 3rd goalie, comes up, looked phenomenal before he, of course, went off with an injury too. What's the update on his injury, and when might we see him back?
Yeah, so Dansk's injury was a little weird. He wasn't even involved in the play. He was just moving back and forth in the crease, and he slipped and fell. It looked like he may have strained something. All the team has given us is it's a lower body injury, and that he's going to miss the rest of this road trip. So I think the next game after that is like the November 17th game here in Vegas. So expect Dansk to miss at least this 6-game road trip, maybe longer. Subban, who also got injured, who's ahead of him, is expected to miss 4 weeks. That was about a week and a half ago, so he's still 2.5 weeks out. So it might be Max Lagacé for the foreseeable future until maybe Fleury comes back.
Yeah, or maybe someone else gets hurt. I know they called up Ferguson, the 19-year-old from the juniors in Canada, right?
At this rate, we may see Ferguson. He's definitely an emergency only. Obviously, in the NHL, sometimes you want to put a goalie in every once in a while just to give your guy a rest. I don't think that's going to happen with Ferguson. The only way he sees the ice is if Lagacé were to get injured.
Yeah, well, while we're talking about the goalies, didn't get a question on this, but you brought up Malcolm Subban. I'm surprised that we got Dansk and Fleury, but no Subban, who looked phenomenal as well, relieving Marc-Andre Fleury. I think maybe one of the best moments of the season was his first start comes against the Bruins, his former team, who, more or less gave up on him. They didn't have a spot. He was a former first-round pick, and he beats them still in their pads. When you look at Subban and Dansk, 2 young guys that I know they're high on, what's kind of going to be their future in the franchise? How do you see them I guess once they get back from injury, what should we look out for those guys?
I mean, Subban was a very high draft pick coming out. He's a first rounder, which is rare for goalies. goalie coach Dave Pryor was really high on him. He was the one that told George McPhee, go get this kid. They let go of Calvin Pickard, who's a starting goaltender in this league. They waived him. They traded him to the Maple Leafs for a 6th-round pick, which is basically nothing, solely because they believed in Malcolm Subban so much. So I think this team believes they can make this. He's only 22. He flamed out in Boston. They gave up on him. But I think this team believes that he could be the future goaltender for this team for years to come.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people were scratching their heads with that Pickard move for sure. They even had to design your Pickard goalie mask, which I thought was interesting. But, you know, a lot of people looked at it as, well, the Golden Knights are a long-term project, so clearly this is something for the future. But I think that, you know, Subban even kind of proved them wrong, that maybe Dave Riley saw something that he could contribute right away, because he certainly did that. It's going to be interesting to see those guys' development. You know, look, the Golden Knights have been clear from day one, at least General Manager George McPhee, that this is a process. They're not trying to win the Stanley Cup this year. They want to be in position a few years down the road, maybe Subban, Dansk, some guys that can help with that. Speaking of those guys that are going to kind of be on the roster for a long time, I think one of the more surprising players that people are talking about, Shea Theodore, made his debut last night, a young defenseman. This is from Brittany on Twitter, who was one of the people that asked about him. She said, from what you've witnessed with Theodore, who would you like to see him on the ice with?
Yeah, so Shea came up and made his NHL debut last night against the Rangers. He didn't play a great game, but it was his first game up in the NHL after spending the rest of the beginning part in the AHL. He played okay, and I think, so Shea Theodore is a very offensive defenseman. When he's out there, he's almost like a 4th forward on the ice. So what you want to do is you want to pair him with a safer, more defensive guy that's not that worried about jumping into the play. I think a guy that's perfect for that is a guy like Derek England, who's a veteran guy. He knows not to get too far up. They're going to get caught with odd man rushes. What surprised me was last night he played with Colin Miller, who is the other offensive defenseman. So it was kind of weird last night playing both of those guys together. And obviously they gave up 6 goals. 2 of them were with those guys on the ice, and they were partially to blame on them. So I think right now they're playing with Colin Miller. I see Shea Theodore ending up with a more defensive guy like England or maybe a Lucas Spiza.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with England. I know it's still early in these stats. It's a small sample size, but England, the local, leading the team in plus-minus, +7. He had that, you know, great second goal of T-Mobile Arena history that everyone will always remember against the Coyotes. So he's definitely been a talking point this season. While we're hitting on Theodore, I know this is something you've talked about. You've kind of tried to bash into people's heads that this guy was good enough to be here all along. And this is one question we got, is why did it take so long to get Shea Theodore up from Chicago into the Golden Knights roster?
Yeah, and it just comes down to numbers. When this team came out of the expansion draft, they had an overwhelming number of defensemen on this team, and George McPhee has done a very good job of not giving away assets for nothing. He got 30 players in the expansion draft, and in all 30 of them, they're either playing for the Golden Knights, playing for the Chicago Wolves, still property of the Golden Knights, or they've gotten a draft pick for them. He didn't want to waive players, so Shea Theodore is waiver exempt because he's still on his rookie deal. When you get in the NHL, your rookie deal, you can be sent back and forth from the minors to the NHL without being up for grabs. So because Theodore just happened to have that waiver exemption, he was sent down despite being better than most of the guys that were left up. Now that they've waived Jason Garrison, they've waived Reinhart, they've made some other trades, Shea Theodore, there's now room for him, and I expect him to stay up here unless something crazy happens.
Right, I think there was kind of a perception with that whole thing, at least from the outside. You know, the Golden Knights clearly had a logjam at defensemen, had all these defensemen, but I think everyone was thinking maybe George McPhee's going to make a trade. I think if you would have asked people, you probably would have expected to see some kind of trade before now. What's your take on that? Do you think he's been calling around, or is this just what do you think? I mean, obviously we haven't seen, you know, a trade since the regular season began. Is that something that's still going to be coming, or what do you think of that whole situation?
I think McPhee's definitely open to trading a defenseman if he gets a good offer. I think teams saw the predicament he was in, and they realized that McPhee had no leverage, so they wouldn't offer him anything good because they figured, we'll just wait it out, and then you'll have to waive one of these guys and we'll get him for free. Obviously, McPhee didn't waive them. He just sat still, let Theodore sit in the AHL, and obviously caused some problems with another guy, Vadim Shipachyov, that we'll hit on later. But I think teams realized McPhee no longer had the leverage, and that's why a trade hasn't happened.
Makes sense. Well, still something to watch, especially to see, you know, how they go from here and if McPhee pulls the trigger on some of these deals. While we're on the future, another question from Nate on Twitter. He wants to know, when will we realistically see Cody Glass in a Knights game? So
Cody Glass, obviously a lot of people are excited for him, the highest draft pick in Golden Knights history. They took him number 6 overall. He returned to the juniors, to the Portland Winterhawks, after having a pretty good preseason. The thing with Cody Glass is I think he's actually good enough to play in the NHL right now, but I don't think it's worth wasting one of his years. So when he signed a 3-year deal, it's a entry-level contract worth $925,000 a year. But the Golden Knights don't have to start using those 3 years until 3 years from now if they want. They can keep him with the Portland Winterhawks for 3 more years. And why develop him on the Golden Knights and then in 3 years you're going to have to pay him this huge contract when you can delay that 3 years and actually get him for 6 years before giving him that massive contract? So if the Golden Knights were in win now mode, he'd be there now. I think realistically the soonest we could see him would be next year if he comes into training camp and absolutely blows everyone away. If he comes into training camp and he is the best center on the ice, he'll end up on the Golden Knights. That's pretty much the only way I see that happening.
Yeah, and I totally understand that, and I get it from the fans' perspective. You know, if you have a talent like that or a guy that you even say is NHL ready, you want to see them. But, you know, that's something a lot of times that people don't consider is that, you know, that 3 years of service is going to kick in, and it makes a lot of sense to wait, especially with the Golden Knights on their timeline right now. That being said, like we've mentioned and alluded to time and time again, they're off to a better start than anyone expected, including you. Matt on Twitter calls you out. I got to give you credit, though. I would have gone worse than this. There's no way I'm going better than like 4-6. He says, remember when you said Vegas would go 5-5 in its first 10 games?
I was dead wrong on that one. I mean, but the thing is, I was closer than most people, I feel like.
Oh, I think if we surveyed everyone in the hockey world, I mean, the average is maybe 3 wins. Like, you know, they get the Coyotes twice. You think they want one of those, but 8-2, I guess, in the first 10 games. Like, that was very hard to call.
Yeah, it was funny. When I made that 5-5 prediction, I got a bunch of grief because I was being too optimistic, and it turns out I was actually underselling them.
For sure. So it's been fun. We'll see. I know you made predictions for the season long. You can still find those on LasVegasSun.com. Just search for Jesse's predictions. I think some of them you've hit on, though. Pretty good.
I did. I got the right shutout. The first shutout, which was on October 27th against the Avalanche. I did not think they'd win 7-0, but I did have the shutout prediction. But I had Marc-Andre Fleury in there in net getting it, not Oscar Dansk. Who could have predicted? At the time I made that prediction, he was actually the backup goaltender for the Chicago Wolves. So,
my favorite one, the one I'm watching, is you said no hat tricks at T-Mobile this year. We were in trouble, maybe even the first game. That could have happened, but of course, James Neal scores too early, doesn't get the third. I think Neal would be the obvious suspect, maybe, if one's going to get in there. That's one I'm watching for sure.
Riley Smith almost had one last night in New York. He got 2 early ones, and then he had a wide open net when it was 4-2. And if he would have cashed that in, I mean, the game could have changed a lot. That would have put him up 3 at that point, and maybe they wouldn't have had that third period collapse if Riley Smith would have gotten that hat trick.
All right, well, we have a live Facebook question. Thanks a lot to Ray B for asking this. He says, how do you see the home crowds being the rest of the season? He's hoping to get some cheap tickets. I think that this is a lot of people in town, not just Ray B.
Yeah, the tickets so far have been pretty expensive because this is the hottest ticket in town. It's a brand new team. Everyone's excited. But if you just go on there and look right now, they drop drastically later in the season. And obviously when big marquee teams come in like the Maple Leafs and the Penguins and the Washington Capitals, the tickets prices are going to be high. But if you want to just bring your family, maybe you got a few kids, you need to get tickets for a little cheaper. You can go to see them play the Avalanche, then play the Coyotes, then play maybe the LA Kings later in the season, and the tickets you can find tickets for $25-30, I think.
I think that Avalanche game, first one, though, was deceptively one of the more expensive, just being Nevada Day. A lot of kids got to go to their first game. I think that was probably a pretty cool scene and a good idea by the Golden Knights to kind of connect with the community even more, which I think we can agree they've done a great job on. While we're talking about watching the game and kind of the fan experience, this one kind of different, but I liked it. Vegas John from Twitter, he wants to know where are the best places to watch the game. Obviously, if you can't make it to T-Mobile Arena. Yeah,
if you don't make it to T-Mobile, right outside T-Mobile is the park. They've got Beer House, they've got Shake Shack, they got a couple spots in there, and it's really cool because you're kind of right there next to the arena. You see the people going into the game, you see the people coming out of the game, you feel like you're a part of it. They have a lot of like outdoor seating out there. I think it's really cool. I've been there before and after games, and it's a cool atmosphere. If you don't want to go down to the Strip, there's other places like Born and Raised, which Born and Raised has been the home of UNLV for so long. They've kind of got their big crowd that goes there, and I've heard that the crowds are big for Golden Knights games as well. And then places like Suncoast and Crown and Anchor by UNLV and Suncoast out in the way northwest, you got watch parties there that are always packed. So I mean, if you look around, and then the D downtown, if you want to go down to Fremont Street, they do a watch party there. So there are a lot of places, just depending on where you want to go.
Yeah, I think you mentioned on some of the ones I was going to say. I went to Born and Raised after a game once, and it was just covered in Golden Knights gear. And then after the Avalanche game, I was downtown. I know the D has that deal with the Golden Knights where they're the official downtown watch party, and it just was covered in people in Golden Knights gear were really into it. So I think those are two good places to check out. We'll get back to some of the more hockey questions. Kelly on Twitter wants to know, when will we see more of the Eric Halle and Alex Tuch line? Alex Tuch to me is
a star for this team, and he's been paired with Halle, which makes sense because they both came from Minnesota. They got them both from the Wild in the expansion draft. Tuch via trade, Halle was the pick. And they've played together with Oscar Lindberg, and I think that might be the best line as far as how they're playing right now. Obviously, Neil and Perron started the season well. They've kind of slowed down the last few games. I think that Oscar Lindberg at center with Halle and Tuch on his wings has been a really good line, and they scored again last night. And this team just, it seems like it's a different line every couple games, and that's why they've been able to be so successful. Is a different line, steps up every game, but I think that's been the most consistent so far.
Eric Halle, sorry, I think I mispronounced that. We got a pretty easy hockey team in terms of pronunciations, actually, but you still got to give us a little bit. Still getting uphill hockey town. I apologize for that. Another question, this is a different Kelly. Fun Kelly, you kind of touched on this in the last question sometimes before, but she wants to know, I think what a lot of people are, since most of these guys haven't played together before, with the exception of maybe Halle and Tuch, what do you attribute their ability to gel as a team so quickly?
Yeah, I think we all overestimated how much that's going to affect this team early on. As media, as fans, as everyone, I think we thought that it would take them a little longer. The truth is, hockey systems and the schemes they run are all very similar. It's like, I was talking to one of the guys, and he basically told me it's just verbiage. Just the words that the coaches use is different. Once you get that, the plays they run, everything is pretty much the same when you go to hockey teams. And so these guys, plus add to the fact that most of these guys were not star players that had a set line that they were on every night. They were always getting mixed, because the third and fourth lines are always in flux with guys going up and down, healthy scratches being brought in and out. These guys are used to, we got a lot of players that are used to being mixed and matched their whole career, so I think they were just built for this.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good answer of kind of why you've seen this success. These guys, that's kind of what a lot of them spent their career doing, playing with different guys filling in where needed. Now they're getting their opportunity. I know one thing that another thing seems to be a talking point around town, not really a question, but just how hard these guys play. It really does seem like, every possession, every defensive stand is like they're battling for their lives. And I think that's been one thing that's kind of made the community warm towards this team, is just how hard they've played, how much they've hustled. I know they've had their problems in the third period. Maybe now's a good time to talk about that. What's the deal with the third period? It seems like if anything goes wrong for this team, it's usually in the third period.
Yeah, they've been the best second period team in the entire NHL, and they've been one of the worst third period teams, and there's really no schematic explanation for it. We talk to Gerard Gallant every time it happens, and he never seems to, the best answer I've been given was by defenseman Luca Spiza, and he said it was after their overtime win against the Buffalo Sabres, where the Sabres scored 3 goals to tie it in the third period. Then the Golden Knights came back and won, and he said, we win in overtime because we're not afraid to lose in overtime, because you've got that point at that point. You've secured, even if you lose, you get a point. At the end of the third period, the team kind of tenses up. They go into a shell. They play not to lose instead of to win. And Gerard Gallant has constantly said, I'm trying to get them to play the same way for 60 minutes, but it's just human nature. If you're up goals going into the third period, you're going to play a little more back. And I think that they've just got to break that. Clearly, after last night's game, going to the third period up 2 goals and then losing by 2 goals, getting outscored 4-0 in the third period. They haven't fixed it yet, but I think that's something that they definitely need to if they're going to continue this hot start.
I certainly think there's a little bit of explanation in what you just said, but what I would say is, and I know it's not the sexy answer, but we always got to be cognizant of sample size in sports, especially even hockey. A lot of times we try to assign meaning to places where there are none. A lot of times in things like this, it's been 10, 11 games. The things kind of even out by the end of the year. This might just be, a random stretch of games where some things have gone wrong. They'll probably address it. They'll probably fix it. And by the end, it's probably going to be normal. But it has been an interesting storyline that this team's been so bad in the third period. Another question from Marlon on Facebook. He noticed that we have 7 more games, meaning the Golden Knights, of course, until they face another team with 8 wins. He wants to know, why don't we call up some scorers so we can at least try to squeeze a 500 record until our goalies get healthy? He again points out we're facing bad teams. If we can't stop them, let's just outscore them. Seems like it might be a little more complicated than that, but what do you think to say to Marlon?
And I see what Marlon's saying, because he watched the preseason and he saw guys like Tyler Wong and Hika and Polkanen that scored goals, and they've been scoring goals for the Chicago Wolves down there. And these guys, and they were spectacular goals in the preseason. And Wong obviously had the hat trick in the first one, so he's a guy that a lot of people latched onto. The problem is, when you call a guy up from the AHL, you have to move somebody for that roster spot, you've only got 23 spots on that roster, and the Golden Knights are already having problems fitting all their players. So it's just not feasible to bring any of those guys up. If you were to, then you'd have to end up waiving a guy and losing someone. It's not like you can just bring them up and then switch them back out when the goalies come back.
Yeah, we've already explained some of the difficulty, with those transactions. Is why you saw guys like Theodore play so much in the AHL. Tuck even didn't start the season on the roster, so it is a little more complicated, a little hard to shuffle all the pieces. But all these high-scoring guys, there's a reason to pay attention to the AHL, because these guys that look so exciting, they're going to be up eventually. They're going to be a part of this franchise, probably even more long-term than some of the guys that are contributing in a big way right now. So definitely something to watch going forward. Another guy that players might have seen in the preseason, and I know have a connection to, because he's the answer to the biggest trivia question of who's the first ever Golden Knight, Reed Duke. Went back with assistant GM Kelly Krim and ended up being the first Golden Knight sign, as I said. People want to know what's the status of him. Keith from Facebook ran into him at the Arsenal. It seems like I run into him at every home game. So what is Reed's current status?
Yeah, Reed's everywhere. What happened was Reed was injured in the rookie scrimmage down in LA. They played 2 scrimmages before they started the preseason. He was injured in it. They waited. They weren't sure if he needed surgery or not on his shoulder. They ended up getting the surgery on his shoulder. He was in a sling for a while. He's now out of the sling, so that's good. But the thing is, he would have been sent down to the Chicago Wolves as soon as they started doing cuts in the preseason if it weren't for that injury. But because he's injured, if you've got this guy, would you rather him? I'm not saying the Chicago Wolves don't have a good training staff, but they don't have an NHL rehab training staff. So I think they're just keeping him here while they can. He doesn't count against the roster because he's on the IR, so they can just let him hang out in Vegas. Obviously, this is cool for him. He gets to do a lot of the events, and fans love him. He gets to do all that. Plus, he gets to rehab his shoulder with an NHL training staff.
Interesting. I didn't even realize that, and I think it's kind of built to his mystique, being that if you go to a Golden Knights event, you already know Reed Duke's face from all the stories when they signed him, and now he's always been around. So it's interesting that injury is kind of slowed down his hockey career in the short term, but really got an even better connection with the fans because of that.
And McPhee said that it should take about 6 months for him to recover, and then they're hoping to send him down to Chicago once he does, and he'll play some games for the Wolves and get ready. They're really focused on him. They don't really worry about how many games he gets this year. They just want him healthy 100% going into next training camp, which is obviously a long ways out, but that's probably the next time you'll see Reed Duke.
One thing Gerard Gallant, I know, has struggled with, and he said that they have so many defensemen, as we talked about, that it's hard to decide who's going to sit, who's going to play every day. But one guy that's really stood out, Brad Hunt. We have a question: why did Vegas sit Brad Hunt? They have an abundance of D, but this guy had 7 points in 6 games. So what's your take on Brad Hunt?
That person's right. I mean, after watching the game against the Rangers last night, when they sat Brad Hunt with a healthy scratch, he was missing, and they didn't score on the power play, and he's been one of the best defensemen on the power play for them. I think the reason they sat him is because he's the same type of defenseman as Shea Theodore. So obviously they brought Shea Theodore in. He made his debut. They were trying to find someone similar to swap him out with, because if you swap Theodore out with a guy like Spiza, who is a lockdown defender that he kind of shadows the other team's star offensive player and just plays defense all game, you're not really worried about offense, then you lose that aspect. But with Hunt and Shea being the same type of player, you can kind of swap them in without losing much. Obviously, I don't think it turned out to be probably the wrong decision, because Hunt was clearly missing on the power play last night. I think that he'll probably be back in the lineup sooner than later.
Right, Hunt, the team leader in assists, all those 7 points, all off of 7 assists. So definitely been, one of the bright spots on the team. One guy that's, kind of been a disappointment. I know he's working to get better, but Jason Garrison, who came over from the Lightning, I believe, the Red Hot Lightning, best team in the NHL. Someone wants to know, speaking of a logjam on defense, of course, Jason Garrison now sent down. They want to know, is he an asset that can be traded, or is his salary too high for another team to take on?
Yeah, so Jason Garrison is definitely an asset that can be traded. They don't want to keep him in the AHL all year. He's probably the highest paid player in the entire league. He's making $4.6 million a year. A team that needs a solid veteran defenseman, someone like the Washington Capitals, would be perfect. The only problem is the Washington Capitals don't have $4.6 million in cap space. What the Golden Knights can do is, in the NHL, you're allowed to retain up to 50% of a player's salary in a trade. So the Golden Knights could actually pay the $2.3 million, and then the other $2.3 would only have to count against the team they trade him to. So, and that obviously raises his value. A cheaper Jason Garrison is a more valuable Jason Garrison. So They could end up doing that. The Edmonton Oilers are another team that's got a lot of firepower, but they don't have defensemen. So look for Jason Garrison to definitely be on the market.
Right. He cleared waivers, of course, when they sent him down. I know I heard the Oilers throwing around, maybe some other teams. Seemed like a little bit of a surprise to me that he cleared waivers. What about you? Did you expect it to go like this, or did you think some team would claim him?
I did not think he would be claimed only because of the salary.
Right.
I think Jason Garrison's definitely too good to fall through waivers, but you're sitting there and these teams see that $4.6 million and they think, if we just don't claim him and let him clear, then maybe we can trade for him, give the Golden Knights a low round pick, a 6th round pick, a 5th round pick, and take off that $2.3 million from the salary, and we can get him a little cheaper.
Makes sense. So that covers Jason Garrison. Back to the goalies. How does this team keep winning with different goalies every night? Some, even most, with no NHL experience.
Yeah, it's been wild, and it's all the credit to Dave Pryor, the goalie coach. George McPhee told us he's the best goalie coach in the entire NHL. He has no problem saying that. His track record speaks to that. He was with George McPhee when he was with the Washington Capitals. Everybody remembers Olaf Kolzig. He was one of the best goalies of that generation. He finally retires from the Capitals. Everyone's wondering, what are we going to do? They bring in Semyon Varlamov, who was great for the Capitals during those years when kind of Ovechkin and Crosby were going at it in the playoffs. Varlamov gets traded to the Avs. Braden Holtby comes in. Everyone knows him as one of the best goalies in the league now. He was developed under Dave Pryor. And now here with the Golden Knights, Dave Pryor has helped Fleury look younger than we ever thought he would. Subban has looked better than he ever did in Boston. And now these two young guys come in and they've played well. The only thing I can think of is it's all Dave Pryor.
Yeah, for sure. I think Dave Pryor, one of the more interesting, one of the stories of the season so far, what he's done with these guys. I talked to Oscar Dansk a little bit, and he raved about being able to work with Dave Pryor. He said compared to other goalie coaches, he just lets you get away with less. He's, I guess, a very old school, on you, strict disciplinarian, but obviously it works. I mean, the proof is what we've seen so far, and I know Lagasse hasn't been great, and but this is the 4th goalie. I mean, what bad luck. You look at goalie injuries across the league, and do all the teams combined have about equal to what the Golden Knights have gone through? Yeah,
I saw a stat that there have only been, I think, 10 teams that have had to use 4 goalies in their inaugural season. For the entire 82-game schedule, there have only been 10 teams. So the Golden Knights have done that in 10 games. It really is unprecedented what's happening with these goalies.
Yeah, everything unprecedented about this team, though. And, another thing that I think no one saw coming, of course, Reed Duke was the first signing, but I believe the second was Vadim Shipachyov from Russia. Everyone was really excited to get this guy. I mean, it was kind of a prized free agent. There were a lot of teams going after him. Now, I don't even know where to start with this saga, so I'm just going to throw it to you. What's going on with the Shipachyov situation?
It's such a mess. This is really the only black eye for this team so far in their franchise is the Vadim Shipachyov situation. He was brought over here. He's making $4.5 million a year. He's one of the highest paid players on the team. He was fully expected to be the #1 center on this team for the first line. He has not played great, but he hasn't played much at all. He was sent down to the AHL. The first time they told him you don't have to play. The second time they sent him down, they told him to play in Chicago. Shipachyov then refused to report to Chicago for a couple days. He wouldn't. They told him you'll be suspended without pay if you don't, so he reports. The next day, there's a game for the Chicago Wolves. He doesn't show up. Nobody knows where he is now. He hasn't shown up. He has been suspended by the Golden Knights without pay. There have been reports from TSN in Canada saying that Shipachyov's agent is basically threatening he will void the contract and go back to the KHL in Russia, which is where the Golden Knights got him from. He's the best player in the KHL. The only thing is, if he were to do that, he already got a $2 million signing bonus from the Golden Knights. He would have to pay that back, and for obviously the KHL does not pay like the NHL does. For a guy like that, $2 million is a lot of money. There have been reports that it's already done. He's already going back to Russia, but the Golden Knights have said, we're not giving up on him that easy. We want him to work his issues out in the AHL. We want him to develop, and we believe he can be this player that we thought he would. But at this point, it's not looking good for Vadim Shipachyov's future in Vegas.
Yeah, well, that was from Jerry from Twitter. Also wanted to know about Shipachyov. Kind of touched on that, but he just wants to know the chances of him bailing to Russia. I mean, you said a lot of people say it's already done, but we haven't got confirmation. I mean, I guess percentage-wise, or what's your feel right now? Do you think is it going to happen?
I think he probably doesn't. I think we've seen the last of Shipachyov in a Golden Knights uniform. If I were to guess, obviously this isn't done, and I've been trying to work on getting a confirmation from the team. But if I were to guess right now, I would say Shipachyov will not be in the NHL this year. Because I don't think a team's going to trade for him with this situation that's happening. I think he will end up having to void that contract, and he can always, even if the Golden Knights don't agree to void the contract, he can retire from the NHL and then go back to Russia, which is what Ilya Kovalchuk did with the New Jersey Devils, and he had like 10 million or 10 years, $100 million left on his contract when he did it. So there is a precedent for a player just saying, I'm going to Russia, there's nothing you can do.
Right, got to be hard to swallow that $2 million though. Well, that's going to do it for our first ever Golden Knights chat. That was Jesse Granger breaking down everything. Hopefully we'll be back again. Maybe the Golden Knights can finish off this road trip a little stronger than they started. Maybe Marc-Andre Fleury will come back. Maybe we'll have an update on the Shipachyov situation. For Jesse, I'm Case. Thanks for tuning in today.